Alexandra Silber, thank you so much for joining me and welcome. I want to talk to you about so many things that I don't even know where to start. Uh, but let's start with Einstein and the beautiful cast recording. It's out of Einstein's dreams. And, for you, your voice is so extraordinary and so
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you.
And I feel like this is one of the shows that was almost like custom made for your voice. Like you got to show off your voice in ways that are I don't know that I don't. I mean, you always are great, but in this show, it was like I was like, did they write this just for her?
I suppose so. It's so interesting you say that because I definitely felt empowered in the score, and it was a show that this very rarely happens in show business where you're offered a role rather than auditioning for it. And this happened to be a show I was offered. And so in some ways, I think Joshua Rosenblum, the composer, must have had someone like me in his mind, if you will, in his ears when he was thinking about who he could get in sort of contemporary times that would fit this composition. So, and then yes, I think little tweaks and caters that were like, hey, I can do this, that maybe other people haven't been able to do with the score before, and little things like I do have this like belt that I very rarely get out. It almost now feels like a parlor trick or something, but it's something I've long done. It's just I don't always get hired to do that stuff, and it was really really fun to be able to kind of go all over the place with the role vocally, and it wasn't just styles of singing. It was also sort of like characters and genres and time periods. It was just such a literally sort of like a romp through the universe, musically.
Mm. Like the way that I think about this show is like it's a chamber musical that behaves and acts like an opera almost, right?
That's a really great description. I could never have come up with that myself, but I think that's exactly right. And um and yeah, maybe even like a chamber opera, like a because exactly right. It's a relatively small cast, and yet really really tells its story predominantly through the music and moves, um and isn't sung through like an opera, but the majority of the story does move through music, and so therefore yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the music is hugely expressive in terms of what's going on.
It totally is. It's like I don't know, like I was listening to it in my headphones. It's like I felt like I was like in a huge, you know what I mean? Like it's engulfing, like it
Yeah,
swallows
yeah,
you.
yeah. All consuming, totally.
What was the experience of recording the songs for the cast recording? Was this always meant to happen, or how did the cast recording come about?
Such a great question. And it's such a great question for any cast recording that isn't like Broadway, because it's always very interesting how these things come to be. Well, a couple of things. I think that for Joshua Rosenblum and Joanne Lesner, who is the book writer and lyricist, and they have been working on this piece for years and years. It has had a couple of productions, one of which I think was in Portugal even, but it's never made its New York premiere, and this was it. And so I think they were really excited to have a New York cast, and they had had live recordings of it, but never had a studio recording. And the company that produced the musical, Prospect Theater Company, has a great relationship with Broadway Records. And I also have a great relationship with Broadway Records, having recorded Fiddler on the Roof with them, having recorded Arlington with them. So this is my third Broadway Records recording, which is quite exciting. And I think it just became very clear that the show was very musically special. And not only were the performances really exciting, but the score and the orchestrations also were really worth preserving. So Prospect and then I approached Broadway Records and said, I think this is really where we want this recording to live if you'll have us. And they very generously said yes. And then money was raised and cast was assembled, and it all happened. And what was really interesting was usually a cast recording is done during the run of a show, but because it was off Broadway and kind of a last minute exciting thing, the recording was scheduled a couple months after the show. So everybody came back together and recorded in one day. And then, as a slightly hilarious reality, I was actually unable to join the cast on that day because I was already doing another job in London. So I wasn't even like commutably available. I was an ocean away. And this was in early February before, the world sort of collapsed. We had a very strange rehearsal process in which we had this week off in February because Rebecca Teichman, I was in her production of Indecent in London. They were reconstructing the Broadway production in London.
Wow.
And she had a week off to come back to Broadway to transfer her most recent Broadway show. So the cast had a week off, and I thought, well, I think I'll go home. And in that week off in February, so about a week later, I punched all of my stuff in, and Zal Owen, who played Einstein, came to record our stuff together. But so I was kind of the straggler, and it was actually quite funny. They took a huge picture of the whole orchestra and the whole cast and all of the technicians. They took this picture and they sent it to me, and I used my iPhone to sort of draw a stick figure version of me on the very end. And I was like, what a great picture. And everybody was like, you look like you've lost weight. It was really funny. So it was such a joy. And that's how it came to be. And a lot of off-Broadway or sometimes regional or studio-only productions happen in this way, where the people involved get really passionate and somehow they make it happen. And I think it's wonderful because those are things that might not otherwise, without that extra passion, ever be heard unless you were there, So it's very exciting because, as you know, whenever you hear a cast recording, in so many ways, the production kind of comes back to life. And when I was a kid, I'm sure the same for you, that's how I experienced theater, was predominantly through recordings. And I had huge, huge productions occur in my head because of a recording. So I just like to think of all of the little kids just like me out there listening. For me, it was on my Walkman. I don't know about you, but listening to those recordings in the future, hopefully falling in love with the theater just like I did.
I love that, because especially right now that, we can't gather in community and go to live shows, I wonder if there's any favorites, any cast recordings from your childhood or from your life that you have been, like mounting productions in your head off these days.
I mean, isn't that so accurate though? Haven't you done the same thing where you're like, and now, like,
all the time.
All the time. So, oh my God. So first of all, there are, for sure, I'm kind of curious what yours are too, but I have two. They're so endemic to my childhood. They tell you everything you need to know about when I was a teenager falling in love with theater. I think the most, my favorite cast recording, there's really no second place and it's really sentimental, but it's also about everything else, is the original cast of The Secret Garden. I think it's also because that recording is so complete that you really can listen to it like a radio play. There's so little of the dialogue and score that's missing. You can follow the story so clearly. I actually have a memory of listening to it on a road trip with my family and all of us weeping. I have another memory years later. I was doing the out-of-town tryouts for the last West End revival of Carousel, in which I played Julie. And we were in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I showed up early to the theater to kind of just make my dressing room feel cozy. And I ended up playing the entirety of The Secret Garden and just ended up on the floor of this dressing room alone, completely alone in Edinburgh, like just weeping. So Secret Garden is very, very, very special to me. And in many ways, I've luckily been able to say this to her face several times. I feel like Rebecca Luker taught me and a generation of people how to sing. It was such an important voice to me, both literal voice and sort of artistic voice. I would say that my other cast recording favorite is also the original cast of Ragtime, also a very complete recording. And that was also the first Broadway show I ever saw live, so it was very special. And then honorable mentions include The Kiss of the Spider Woman, which is just, I'm just saying it now. I'm hoping is my destiny. Please call me for the revival. I just feel like that score, the play, the score, the film, all of it is so unbelievably special and progressive. And again, about the power, I mean, it's Kiss of the Spider Woman, I think, is not at all unlike what you're talking about right now, which is in prison, the power of artistic imagination to set you free. And something about that felt very empowering as a kid who felt so different, and I think right now is more poignant than ever.
Which of Aurora's costumes are you dying to wear the most when this production happens? Because I want those costumes also.
I mean, don't we all? Like, I have to say, I think the opening one where she first appears in the big long cape, is, I think that's the one, but really any of them, send them my way. And can't I just wear them in quarantine and walk up and down my apartment?
I mean, you might as well be doing that, right? Like, we don't know.
Right. We're the bosses of us right now.
Yeah, and it would be, I mean, I would be very proud of you if you were doing that at home. Just like you were asking me about mine, I wear a towel after the shower and I do the whole of Evita, and I'm Eva, obviously.
Obviously.
And I have like my bun and I'm like, like singing and like doing the arms. So yeah, Evita is like totally one of mine, especially because like we're all home right now, looking out the window, right? So
we don't want to waste a balcony moment.
No, we don't.
That's what sad. We don't want to waste those moments.
Yeah, that's probably what the president told himself last night, right?
Did you see Patti LuPone's tweet?
I did, because I was like,
we don't deserve her. We don't deserve her. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, it was fire. I love that. I know that you are a huge history and research nerd, and I mean this as a compliment in this case. As I think I was at the 92Y a couple of years ago where you were first talking about After Anna Tevka, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's such a nerd. I love her. And I wonder what kind of research did you do specifically for Einstein's dream? Because like it's, you're talking about ragtime and you're talking about Fiddler and you're talking about all these things that were happening around the same period in history almost.
Totally.
Is there a special fascination with you in like the beginning of the 20th century? Yeah.
I guess. I mean, maybe, I have to say it definitely is fascinating to come to projects that all occur within a same sort of like 30-year window, because you feel like you come with so much information about what's happening worldwide, and so yeah, it does feel like a huge piece of like I feel like I come really armed with information, but there's always so much to learn about cultural, national, town specificity, how certain businesses are affected or lines of work are affected or groups of people are affected. It's always really interesting. With Einstein, it's actually a really interesting question because the character I played, this is only a tiny bit of a spoiler, so I don't feel terrible saying it, but the character that I played is not a person. The character that I played, we sort of discover is time personified, that she is a manifestation of the concept of time. It's very heady. And basically, this character, Josette, appears to Albert Einstein at the beginning of his life in the form of this woman who spars with him and guides him. And I don't think is disconnected from the concept of like a muse or a genie or, somebody that a very, very brilliant person spars with. And, I think you oftentimes actually hear, especially a lot of creative people will go, Tom Waits very famously talks about the muse talking to him while he's driving down the street and he pulls over the car and writes down his lyrics that the muse is dictating to him. And always like that. I like it too because it feels so humble. Like you're at the mercy of whenever inspiration hits you rather than it kind of being totally generated from the individual. I think there's a nice humility about that. And I have to say, I definitely feel that myself. Sometimes I'll be like, I don't know where that idea came from, but thank you. So that was sort of who I played, which was interesting because it meant that while I could research the time and Albert Einstein and physics, a lot of the research wasn't particularly useful to activating me as a character. You know, there weren't objectives to pursue conventionally as an actor. So a lot of it felt tonal, and a lot of it felt like I had to be particularly, really what I felt that I needed to understand profoundly was physics itself. That was the part where I felt I needed to understand what I was talking about with Einstein, so that I could feel that I was just one step ahead of him, which is saying something. Do you know what I mean? Luckily, I had read the novella Einstein's Dreams in high school by Alan Lightman. I'm such a fan of Alan Lightman's in general because he is a active physicist. He's an active scientist who is also an active creative writer, still publishing new books, and teaches physics at MIT, but also teaches creative writing at MIT. And to me is just such an example that arts and science can not only live peacefully side by side, but can inform each other side by side. And I actually thought about this last night. I don't know if you saw the moon last night, but the moon was so unbelievably gorgeous and orange and huge and just gorgeous. And I thought, this is science and poetry mixing, right? Like, people have written countless songs and poems about the moon. And it's all based on this beautiful image brought to you by nature and science. And there you go. And I also had an amazing high school physics teacher who I want to just say here, Mr. Taufik Naji. And Mr. Naji was the quintessential science teacher who was also made physics seem like poetry, made it seem like the great scheme of the universe had this beautiful design, and that by learning about it, you were able to meaningfully participate in it. And I really thought about and communicated a lot with Mr. Naji during the process, and was so grateful that when someone said, talk about the theory of relativity, thanks to him, I knew what I was talking about. And I think ultimately what I came to from the piece, that I don't know if this is necessarily what I was supposed to get, but it's what I got as an actor in the process, in speaking with Alan Lightman, who was really generous with us during the process, with Josh and Joanne, who are also very generous, and of course with the entire creative team, was that science and art, and I think probably the unexplored, but the third pillar in human society that makes meaning is probably spirituality. But that human beings, like, what sets us apart is our desire and our capacity to make meaning of existence. And science is able to do that through the beauty of order, right? And art does that by uniting emotionally universal realities. And I think spirituality, for a lot of people, regardless of what it is, makes meaning of our role in the greater universe beyond our daily lives and this earth, you know, kind of makes you think very, very, very macro. And if you've got a piece of all of those together, you've really got something figured out. And I think I really appreciated that the character I played, Josette, was an artistic creation in the realm of science who really came to Einstein as a spirit. And therefore she, within her, possessed that trifecta.
Oh my God, I love everything you said so much right now.
Oh, thank you.
Because no, I totally do. Are you, this has nothing to do with anything, by the way. Do you listen to On Being, Krista Tippett's podcast?
No, but it's on my to-do list, so I must.
Yeah, it's must, especially after everything you just said right now. I'm
Right.
like, Krista Tippett needs to interview you someday.
Okay, I'm down. And no, it's on my to listen list.
Yeah,
I'm so into podcasts. They're my favorite thing.
it is. Do you have a podcast?
No.
Well, you should make it, you should talk about physics and spirituality with the
Okay.
artists. I think it would be incredible. Because what you're saying, in many ways, Einstein's dream, it's kind of like a spiritual, oh, sorry, something fell, I'll repeat that. In many ways, Einstein's dream is kind of like a spiritual companion to Sunday in the Park with George. And, it's art and
Never thought of
science.
that, but yes.
Yeah, you're this, you're Einstein's dot in a way.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Completely. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. And it was exciting to sort of and of course it was exciting to work on something brand new, a completely original score in a world of, and in a New York City, I think in particular right now, is filled with a lot of jukebox musicals. And not that there's anything wrong with those, but it's becoming rarer and rarer that we get completely original musicals. And I think it just makes them all the more special.
And like originating apart, I mean, it's forever your essence captured as the
Forever.
person who created Josette.
Totally. And I hadn't even really thought about that. You're so right. That like when I was a little kid, I remember getting the Samuel French plays and opening up and going, who is the first person to ever do this? Because it's always on the first page. And I thought, I wonder if I'll ever be one of those people. And to think that I've become one of those people a couple times is crazy. Little tiny Al, like I said, little tiny Al at summer camp would be so impressed.
Like, mind blown.
Totally.
Since you have literally played Mother Time, I wonder if you have learned anything about time in quarantine, because to me, time now, it feels almost meaningless in a way. It's changed in so many different ways.
I definitely think it's changed. Wow, what a really great question. I first of all, I completely agree with the fact that time has changed. I don't know that it's meaningless. I think its meaning has altered.
Mhm.
And I mean, I don't know about you, but I think back to March and I go, first of all, it feels like yesterday, and it feels like 10 years ago. Um, and I feel like I'm only just now getting the hang of everything. And also that it's been so long, I could rip out my eyes. Um, I think if I've learned anything from quarantine about time specifically, it's that it has been informed by two things. One, we as a society are completely allergic to talking about mortality, which I think is the ultimate motivator of most time-related fears, right? That if you really think about it, I'm running out of time. To quote Hamilton, why do you write like you're running out of time? There's no time to waste. We have all the time in the world. All these phrases really have to do with the fact that the ultimate clock tick is about the passage of time, because the only guarantee we have is that we're going to die. And I think that the pandemic has taught us that that is possible for anybody. And it's made mortality a sort of front and center conversation. And it's been very uncomfortable for everybody because it's nobody's favorite subject. So I think that has, one, altered the concept of time hugely for people, because what mortality does when it's front and center is it starts to make every individual evaluate what they're doing with their time, right? They're going, why am I not just moving in with this person I'm in love with? Why are we not getting married? Or what am I doing with this person? I've known they weren't my husband for years, right? Or I'm just going to go for it because what do I have to lose? I've lost everything else. I might as well just go for it. Or I need to disengage from this thing that's clearly sucking my life force away. I mean, it's tragedies like this. It's huge global catastrophes like this that motivate people to make big changes, because they realize that this isn't a dress rehearsal. So I think that's changed one thing. And I think that therefore the concept of minutes ticking by has changed because suddenly we have all kinds of space and time to think about very, very, very big things. And sometimes some of us want to do that and are excited to have the opportunity to do that. And for some people, it's bone chilling. And we're spending a lot of time numbing, waiting for old world to come back. And I think a lot of people were asleep. And this has been a big wake up call, for better and for worse. I will say, as Mother Time, as you said, as you called her, I will say that I have had beautiful reminders of what really matters, a beautiful recognition that I am not afraid to die, that I feel that I've lived out loud in a way that I feel proud of, and feel affirmed to keep going forward in that direction, trying to live by my values, which are integrity, to basically walk my talk, courage, which is to do things even if I'm scared, and service, which is to just leave the world even a little better than I left it.
That
That's,
is
that's it.
absolutely beautiful. That's so beautiful. And also, as predominantly a theater artist, right? As a theater actor, as a theater
Mm,
performer, you don't always get the opportunity, if you did more film or television, like, and you can watch yourself, like, oh, that was me like 10 years ago.
totally.
Theater artists don't get that very often. And yet you do, because you have cast recordings. And I wonder if those serve like as time capsules for you. Like, do you go back and think about, oh, I remember what happened exactly the day that I recorded this?
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And it's, as I said sort of earlier, in the way that whole productions come back to life and exist in your head, when you're on the cast recording, the day you recorded it, the production itself, the people you were with, the person you were that year of your life comes back to you in a very similar way. And it's crazy to think we recorded when I did Fiddler on the Roof in London in 2007 and 8. We did a cast recording, and every once in a while I will listen back to it and be like, oh my God, like who even was I back? The innocence and yet also so many memories that seem so present day. And so many of my best friends that are still in my life today were from that particular group of people. And there we were. That's when we met. That's the birthplace of those relationships. And a beautiful word you used is time capsule. That's absolutely, absolutely it. So I think one of the great things that human beings are excellent at is marking existence and marking time in really meaningful ways. And cast recordings are one of them.
I mean, you have mastered time travel, I think, if you have been in your cast recording and you get to relive what everything was like, right?
Beautifully said. What a great way to say that.
Reading after Anna Tepka, first of all, congratulations, because I was like, oh, wow, she can write also?
Thank you.
Like, it's incredible. But what struck me the most about the book was not how, it's really beautiful prose and it's poetic and it's extremely, like, I was like, I can't stop reading this.
I'm glad. I
It's
wanted to make it
beautiful.
a page turner.
but really, what I remember the most vividly about the book was the generosity that you have for your characters, and that you were able to imagine such rich, complex. Now I get, like, you wrote such beautiful inner lives for the
Thank
characters.
you.
And I wanted to ask you, while you were doing, all the times that you've done Fiddler, were you always imagining, the lives of every character and what happened to them after you left them? Because that's like mind blowing.
It Yes and no. It's a little bit of everything. I'll say that it was definitely cumulative, right? Like, this is a little bit of a strange metaphor, but if you if you want to learn something new, like a brand new skill, like I'm thinking of something that's really tangible, like you want to learn a lot about red wine, right? You know, you can't just download all this information. You really have to do it by smelling and looking and tasting glass after glass. You have to do it glass by glass, right? And I think for me, um, it was performance after performance, rehearsal process after rehearsal process, life experience after life experience. When I did Huddle in London, I was in a very specific place in my life. I had not really embraced my Judaism. I was still grieving the death of my father. I was having a very specific experience as Huddle. And I think I was also a girl that had not yet become a woman. And so I was very much in line with Huddle's point of view about the world. And then by the time I was playing Seidel, I had written a lot of After Anatevka. I had gone to actual Siberia to do the research. But by the time I started playing Seidel, it was 7, 8 years later, and I had become a woman. And I was thinking about womanly things like marriage and children and my relationship to society and my relationship to my community and my relationship to my faith and all kinds of things that sort of made me ideally suited to serve Seidel's story. And then as I got into that and lived it, I was accumulating perspectives and new pieces of insight that I would go back to the manuscript and shift. With other characters like Perchik, I started off with a very actor question, if you will, which is, okay, what we know about Perchik is that he is this socialist who clearly was Jewish and is no longer Jewish. And other than that, we know that he has a very rich uncle because he talked about it in Act 2, like one sentence. If that's all we know about him, how did he get to be this angry and passionate? How does a person emotionally become this passionate about a cause? And so I had to answer that as an actor before I could create as a writer the reasons why. So I started kind of backwards. And then there were characters in a completely different process. There's my sort of pet favorite character, Dmitry Petrov, who's sort of Perchik's best friend in Siberia, in prison, who, I'm not kidding, Jose, like literally, I feel like Dmitry knocked on my door, fully embodied, fully costumed, like he was a person that knocked on my door and was like, do you have a pen? Here's my story. I don't feel like I made him up. I feel like he came to me and I just wrote his story down. He just picked me to be his storyteller. I sometimes feel weird taking credit for his existence as a creation because it feels like it was not of my making. So it's all very different, but it's collected. And I have to say it's like a stained glass window where there's like a design and some of the panes of glass aren't filled and some are filled, but they're not colored. And over time, that gets filled and then we add color to that one, and before you know it you have this really complex stained glass window design. But it doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't always happen elegantly, but it's in the endeavoring to make everything just right. And I think what I wanted was, when we see a play, we are bearing witness to lived lives with none of the benefit of the beauty of novel writing. Novel writing and plays are distinct because, as you said, in novel writing, you get very little action, but you get a lot of inner life backstory and motivation and psychology. And then on stage, you get almost 100% action with really just insinuated psychology and backstory. And for me, this was the perfect opportunity to marry those two things completely. And talk about being a nerd. It was just such a joy to be able to say, I've literally lived this. I've embodied these characters. I've lived their lives. Now let me get down how they became who they were, and why they're doing the things they're doing, and the incredible things that are happening in the silences. And I hope I served them, because I care about them like they're real people.
I mean, they are in a way, because this brings us almost back full circle to where we started, because we were talking about atoms and Einstein, and
Yeah.
someone's atoms inspired the character of Tevye, who then was part of a book, who then was part of the musical, and that musical eventually came to you, and then you gave it life. It's like this, like we keep on living forever because our molecules during our time here inspire someone to create something, and we keep creating and creating and
I love
creating
that.
and
I
creating.
love that.
Yeah,
I
it's great.
I think that's I love that, because I feel like I have the perfect thing to say to tie it all together, which is, you're absolutely right. That's how we become timeless, is that our contributions outlive us, that our cast recordings, the things we write, the memories that we leave in people's minds live inside of them. And then we live forever through memory and artistic contribution. And I think that's about as much as anybody could hope for.
Amen to life, right?
New life, l'chaim, indeed.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and break a leg with whatever it is you're doing next. And can you tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find the cast recording, where they can buy After Anatevka? Did you make it? Am I crazy, or did you make an audio version of it also?
We did. We did. I read it, so it's a joy. Okay? So I'll start with Einstein's Dreams is available from Broadway Records on all streaming platforms, and if you want the hard copy, is available directly from Broadway Records and Amazon and all good CD sellers, but very streamable. After Anatevka is available again through all good booksellers. You can get it at any bookstore, Amazon as well, published by Pegasus Books. As is my other book, also White Hot Grief Parade. And both of them are also available on audible.com. They're Audible exclusives. I read both books. And at the end of After Anatevka is a special treat, a little 75-minute concert of Broadway composers who took a couple of the characters and songs and scenarios and wrote original music. And it's like a little mini theatrical book reading concert at the very end of After Anatevka, the audiobook. So there's a lot of incentive to listen to it. And Sheldon Harnick, the original lyricist, reads the foreword. So that's a really wonderful treat and a great pandemic project.
Oh, I have to go get that right now.
I think you'll love it.
Thank you so much for your time, Alexandra. It's
Oh,
always a
thank you,
pleasure.
Jose. Thank you. Bye.